Welcome to another episode, Chosen One. Since you're here, guess it's finally time to talk about the moment your enemies realized they messed with the wrong person. The moment their little schemes hit a wall so solid it made their teeth rattle. And no, I'm not starting with some pretty metaphor, because we don't need glitter to expose the truth. We're starting with a cold, undeniable fact. They tried to dig into your life and ended up digging their own grave. None. You know what's funny? Look who started shaking the minute they realized you weren't the soft target they imagined. Look who suddenly lost the confidence they used to bark with. Look who thought you were easy to figure out, only to choke on their own arrogance. They swore you were predictable. They swore you were small. They swore they could corner you. And now they're whispering things like they just saw the universe glitch. Press the like button and subscribe real quick to pay this message back. Trust me, your enemies can feel every bit of this energy hitting them. Because let's talk about what actually went down behind those closed doors. It wasn't some petty rumor or cheap gossip this time. They crossed a line even they knew was dangerous. They pulled real money from real pockets just to finally expose you. They didn't send some random friend. They didn't send a fake account online. No, they hired someone serious, someone with a reputation for ruining lives with nothing but a single folder of facts. A private investigator with 20 years in the shadows. The type that scares people without even raising their voice. Someone who's seen everything ugly in the world and doesn't flinch. Your enemies thought they finally had you cornered. They imagined this investigator coming back with a thick envelope full of dirt. They imagined scandals, flaws, proof you're not who you appear to be. They imagined the final blow. The moment they finally exposed you. But then reality slapped them harder than they ever slapped you with lies. 3 weeks passed, 3 long weeks. The investigator walked back into that silent room, dropped their bag on the table, and your enemies leaned forward like hungry dogs waiting for scraps. They wanted your downfall served hot. Instead, the investigator froze, literally froze. They sat at the polished table, stared your enemies dead in the face, and didn't speak for several seconds. That alone scared the room. These people are used to bold confidence, not silence. And then the investigator said the one sentence nobody expected. "You didn't tell me they were like this." The whole place went cold. Your enemies felt something crawl up their spine, because this wasn't the tone of someone who found a scandal. This wasn't the tone of someone who uncovered dirt. This was the tone of someone who ran into something they could not explain. And the part that hit them hardest? The investigator wasn't confused about what you did. The investigator was confused about who you are. They said your history didn't line up with your behavior. Your behavior didn't line up with your patterns. Your patterns didn't line up with your past. Every time they thought they understood you, the universe dropped another clue that ruined the theory. You weren't normal. You weren't average. You weren't just another person. Nothing about you matched the predictions. Nothing about you fit the file. Nothing about you followed the usual script. The investigator went through old jobs, old environments, old connections, and still couldn't find the breaking point everyone expected to see. They couldn't find the moment you should have fallen apart. Couldn't find the moment you should have cracked. Couldn't find the weakness your enemies swore existed. And that's when the investigator realized something scary. You weren't supposed to survive what you survived, yet here you are. At that point, your enemies started pretending they didn't care. You should have seen the fake smiles, the fake laughs, the fake confidence. But beneath all that, their stomach dropped. Because this investigator, the one who exposes everyone, was sitting there looking like they just witnessed a ghost, and the investigator didn't stop. They said something even heavier. Every time they should have fallen, they got stronger. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Even the air tried to hide, because that's the truth nobody wanted to admit. You weren't just surviving life. You were bending it. You were turning collapse into power. You were turning betrayal into strategy. You were turning silence into resilience. Every time the universe threw a brick at you, you built another level. And the investigator knew that wasn't normal, that wasn't luck, that wasn't positive mindset. That was something deeper, something the world doesn't see often, something your enemies should have never tested. Your story wasn't a tragedy. Your story was a blueprint for fear. You weren't weak. You were unreadable, unpredictable, untouchable, and that's what froze the investigator. They couldn't find your limits because you don't have any. Meanwhile, the enemy, pathetic, confused, embarrassed, trying to act like they didn't just get hit with the most humiliating truth of their life. Let's go deeper, because this moment didn't come from nowhere. Years back, when you were struggling, when you were getting betrayed, when you were being underestimated left and right, nobody expected you to rise. You were dealing with people who thought you'd stay broken forever. You were surrounded by people who loved the idea of you being weak. But the universe wasn't done with you. Every painful chapter was sharpening you. Every loss was rewiring you. Every betrayal was teaching you how snakes move. You weren't becoming bitter. You were becoming strategic. And that's exactly why the investigator couldn't crack the code. You didn't live your life in straight lines. You lived in plot twists. You lived in comebacks that shouldn't have been possible. You lived in silence that people underestimated until it was too late. And when the investigator tried to piece your life together, the final picture looked nothing like what your enemies expected. Instead of seeing weakness, they saw strength. Instead of seeing chaos, they saw discipline. Instead of seeing a victim, they saw someone the universe clearly protected through storms that destroy people. When they realized that, the fear started. The fear that your enemies now pretend they don't feel. The fear that keeps them checking your social media at 3 a.m. The fear that makes them whisper your name instead of saying it out loud. The fear that makes them regret every step they took against you. Because here's the thing, chosen one, you were never the target, you were the lesson. And the investigator, they didn't expose you. They exposed the fact that your enemies were never on your level to begin with. They wanted dirt, they got destiny, they wanted weakness, they got resilience, they wanted a downfall. They got a mirror showing their own insecurity. And that, chosen one, is why the entire room froze. So chosen one, before we go any further, thanks for standing here with me in this moment. You have no idea how rare it is to witness a story like yours unfold. And trust me, you don't want to blink now. What's coming next will explain exactly why that investigator froze and why your enemies suddenly lost their voices. So stay locked in. Press the like button, subscribe, and drop a 777 in the comments if you're ready to walk through this whole investigation with me. And if you want to push this message louder, hit the super thanks. Every bit of support keeps this mission alive and exposes the truth they tried to bury. Now, take a breath. The next part is where things get even darker for your enemies and even brighter for you. Let's step into it, piece by piece. And if you're truly a chosen one, you'll feel the pull to stay until the very end. Number 1. The moment the file hit the table and their jaws hit the floor. They wanted proof you were a fraud, and instead got proof they were the joke. The investigator didn't walk in with confidence this time. There was no dramatic entrance, no thick folder, no stack of evidence waiting to be weaponized. Instead, they stepped into the room with a single sheet of paper and a face that looked like they'd just survived something unreal. At first, your enemies thought this was great news. They smirked. They leaned back in their chairs. They believed they finally won. But the investigator didn't share their excitement. They didn't even sit down fully. They just held that single page out like it was radioactive. And for a moment, the whole room felt colder than reality itself. Your enemies didn't understand what was happening yet. They assumed this was the final blow they'd been praying for, something they could use to tear you down, something to prove their twisted stories right. They were expecting scandals, secrets, mess, weakness, anything to confirm their fantasies. But the investigator spoke the first sentence, and every smile in the room cracked. "This doesn't match anything you told me." That was the first punch to their ego, because they spent years building lies about you. They rehearsed scripts. They invented fake flaws. They painted you as some unstable disaster, walking around waiting to collapse. And now their own hired professional was staring at them like they'd wasted 3 weeks of their life. The investigator wasn't confused about your past. They were confused about you. They said your story didn't behave the way it should. They said every pattern in your life broke the rules. They said nothing lined up. Not your behavior, not your resilience, not the fact that you kept rising when every logical outcome said you should have failed. And when your enemies tried to argue, the investigator shut them down with something even heavier, something nobody was ready to hear. It's like looking at someone who shouldn't exist according to the rules we all live by. Do you understand how powerful that is? That wasn't a compliment. That was a confession. It was the moment the universe forced everyone to admit the truth they tried so hard to ignore. You were built different, and they couldn't fake that anymore. Think about how humiliating this was for your enemies. They paid real money, pulled real strings, and relied on someone whose entire career is based on exposing people. And instead of exposing you, they exposed the stupidity of the people who came after you. Your enemies expected dirt, but all they got was a clean page and a reality check. This is where most chosen ones pause and ask themselves the same silent question. Why are they so obsessed with me? Why do they need me to be weak so badly? Simple. Because they need your downfall to feel better about their own lack of growth. They need you broken so they can pretend they're whole. They need your collapse so they can avoid facing the truth that you've already faced head-on. You didn't choose this war, they declared it, and now they're losing it. The investigator went through your past, looking for the moment you should have cracked. They expected to find a meltdown, a failure, a collapse. Instead, they saw the opposite. They saw how you kept rising in places where most people don't even survive. Every time life pushed you, you pushed back harder. Every time someone tried to break your spirit, you grew sharper. Every betrayal that should have destroyed you only made you more aware, more strategic, more impossible to predict. The investigator even admitted that your emotional recovery didn't make sense. They said most people stay stuck in the pain, stuck in confusion, stuck in the same cycles forever. But you went through storms that take people out and walked out looking like you'd studied every lightning strike. Your enemies felt sick hearing that, because you weren't supposed to win, you weren't supposed to heal, you weren't supposed to wake up. You weren't supposed to become the version of yourself you are today. According to their expectations, you should have folded years ago. But that's the thing about chosen ones. The universe throws pressure at you, and you turn it into instruction. You turn pain into blueprints. You turn heartbreak into discipline. You turn betrayal into clarity. And that is exactly why the investigator froze, because nothing about your life followed the normal human pattern. You didn't crumble where others crumbled. You didn't lose your voice when people tried to silence you. You didn't fall into the traps they set. You stepped over them like they were nothing but dust. The investigator even said your emotional intelligence didn't match your age or history. It matched someone who had lived through 10 lifetimes of lessons and still came out ready to fight. They couldn't explain how you stayed calm in chaos, how you forgave without becoming naive, how you predicted betrayal before it even showed up. Your enemies glanced around the room, terrified to admit the obvious. Everything they tried to spin about you was a lie, and now the professional they hired had blown their whole cover. Picture that moment. Your enemies leaned forward, waiting for proof you were fake. Instead, they were told you were the realest thing they'd ever underestimated. That's why the entire room fell silent. Not because they respected you, but because they feared what it meant to be wrong about you. And here's something the investigator didn't say out loud, but definitely thought. You were never prey. You were the storm walking straight toward the people who tried to corner you. Let me give you an example your enemies could never accept. Remember those times people tried to control you, those phases where they tried to make you feel small so you'd listen to them. Most people would bend, shrink, or break. But you didn't, even when you were quiet. Even when you kept to yourself, your silence was not the silence of a victim. It was the silence of someone watching, learning, calculating. The investigator caught that energy instantly. It scared them, and it scared your enemies even more, because this wasn't the report they wanted. This was the truth they never wanted to face. They didn't uncover your weaknesses. They uncovered the power you gained from surviving what was never meant to be survived. They wanted proof you were nothing special. Instead, they found a blueprint for a threat they can't handle. This is the moment chosen ones begin to ask, why does my strength bother them so much? Why do they need to pretend I'm less? Because your existence exposes their comfort zones, because your growth highlights their stagnation, because your survival reminds them of everything they failed to become. You didn't beat them by trying. You beat them by evolving. You beat them by staying true to yourself while they hid behind lies. And that's exactly what froze the investigator. Not what they found, but what they didn't find. No weakness. No collapse, no shame, no moment of failure to weaponize, just power, quiet power, steady power, unexplainable power, and your enemies couldn't handle it. So when that single sheet of paper hit the table, their jaws hit the floor. Because that paper wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't want to admit about you. You were the one they couldn't predict. You were the one who kept rising. You were the one who refused to break. You were the one who shattered their full narrative without even trying. And now they know exactly what the investigator realized the second they looked into your life. You're not the problem. You're the proof they never stood a chance. Number 2. When they dug for dirt and found a mirror they couldn't handle. Every shovel they used to bury you only uncovered their own insecurity. They wanted a scandal. The universe handed them a spotless record with their shame reflected on top. Your past wasn't clean by accident. It was clean because their lies never touched your truth. They searched for your darkness and tripped over their own. The investigator didn't stop at surface-level checks. That first shock wasn't enough for them. They thought maybe they missed something. Maybe the real dirt was buried deeper. Maybe everything they saw in the beginning was just a well-hidden trap. So they followed every protocol they had. Birth records, school files, job history, social media archives, criminal databases, financial statements. They even brought out the heavy software, the kind used to rebuild deleted posts, recover hidden messages, track IP addresses halfway across the world. And what happened next wasn't normal, wasn't logical, wasn't human. The deeper they dug, the cleaner everything got. Not regular clean, not good person clean. It was unnervingly flawless, the type of clean that made the investigator feel like they were being played by the universe itself. Every file, every timestamp, every record looked untouched by chaos. They expected to find cracks. They expected inconsistencies. They expected the mess your enemies swore existed. But instead, every new layer made them more uncomfortable. Imagine this. A detective walks into a house expecting a crime scene, but finds every corner glowing like it was polished 5 minutes ago. No dust, no fingerprints, no footprints, just silence, just clarity, just truth. And the truth didn't match what your enemies promised. That's exactly how your investigator felt, like they stepped into a story that refused to bend to lies. Picture this. They open your old school records, thinking they'll find behavioral issues or conflicts. Instead, they find teachers writing notes like, quiet, observant, sharp for their age. Doesn't talk much but sees everything. Your enemies wanted problem child. Your file said silent strategist. Then they moved to your job history. They expected complaints, drama, patterns of conflict. Instead, they found bosses who described you as someone who did their work better than people twice your age. Someone who didn't talk much, but when you did, your words changed the whole room. Someone who knew how to read situations, people, and intentions faster than anyone else. Imagine this. Your enemies sitting in a room rehearsing their lies like bad actors, and this investigator reading report after report, proving those lies never had legs to stand on. And here's the part that really bothered the investigator, the part your enemies never expected. Your life didn't look like a straight line. It looked like a blueprint. A blueprint of someone who learned from everything, someone who adapted faster than anyone around them, someone who didn't need noise to make impact. That alone made them suspicious. Not of you, but of the people who hired them. Think about that. They went into this job believing you were the odd one out. They came out believing your enemies were hiding something, and that's when they dug deeper. They started interviewing people from your past, teachers, bosses, neighbors, the kind of people who normally give random mixed reviews about anyone. But with you, every person said the same thing. You were different. You always noticed things others missed. You weren't loud, but you were always 3 steps ahead. You helped people without asking for anything. You saw things before they happened. Let me answer a question you might be thinking right now. How did they all say the same thing? People usually disagree. Exactly. That's what made this even scarier for the investigator. People rarely align perfectly on someone's character, but with you, the description was almost identical across years, across environments, across situations. That's not normal. That's not random. That's not coincidence. That's consistency. That's integrity. That's the kind of power you can't fake, edit, or lie into existence. Your enemies didn't expect this. They told the investigator stories of you being unstable, dramatic, untrustworthy, chaotic. They painted you as a danger to yourself. They painted you as the problem in every situation. And yet every unbiased witness said the opposite. Your enemies wanted the investigator to confirm their lies. Instead, the investigator found truth so strong it felt like a slap. And here's the deeper truth your enemies never considered. The universe was always cleaning your path behind the scenes, not because you were perfect, but because you never moved with bad intentions. You weren't messy, you weren't reckless, you weren't irresponsible. You just lived in a way that kept your integrity clean, even when your surroundings were dirty. Imagine this: you're walking through mud while everyone else is sinking, but somehow your footsteps land on stones instead of sludge. You don't leave the same marks they leave. You don't create the same chaos they create. And when someone tries to trace your trail, all they find is the path, not the stains. That's how your records looked, untouched by their mess, unaffected by their drama, unafraid of their investigations. Let me answer another silent question you might have. Why do they want something wrong with me so badly? Because if there's nothing wrong with you, they have to face everything wrong with themselves. Your peace exposes their chaos. Your focus exposes their insecurity. Your silence exposes their noise. Your growth exposes their laziness. Your kindness exposes their manipulation. You're a walking mirror they never wanted to look into, and the deeper the investigator looked, the more that mirror blinded them. At one point, the investigator even thought you might be hiding things too well, so they dug harder. They used advanced tracking, old IP logs, forensic social media recovery tools, programs designed to find the smallest shadow in a person's digital trail. Still nothing. No secret accounts, no hidden drama, no double life. Everything pointed back to the same truth. You move clean because you think clean. You act with intention, not impulse. You choose growth, not chaos. You choose progress, not drama. And this wasn't something you did for show. This is who you've always been, even before people were watching. Then came the biggest blow of all, when they talked to old neighbors. People who saw you growing up, walking to school, coming home tired, staying in your lane, minding your business, observing more than speaking. People who remember you as the kid or teen who didn't cling to crowds, who didn't need attention, who didn't follow drama. One neighbor said something the investigator wrote down, word for word. They were always too aware, like they could sense things the rest of us were blind to. That line hit your enemies harder than any punch, because awareness is the one thing manipulators fear most. Your enemies depend on confusion. They depend on people not noticing. They depend on you being clueless, overwhelmed, distracted. But you were the opposite. You always watched from the back row while the world underestimated you. The investigator didn't find dirt. They found patterns, real patterns. Patterns of someone who learned early how the world works. Someone who saw through people long before people saw through themselves. That's what terrified them, not your past, not your records, not your behavior. Your awareness scared them. Your silence scared them. Your consistency scared them. Your growth scared them. Your stability scared them. Your enemies never expected the investigation to prove your power. Never expected people from your past to speak so highly of you. Never expected your story to be this clean. And here's the final truth the investigator realized. You weren't avoiding chaos. You were simply never part of it. Your enemies were projecting their darkness onto you. They wanted you to carry their flaws, their mistakes, their guilt. They wanted you to collapse under rumors so they could feel powerful. But your real life? Too clean to weaponize, too consistent to twist, too strong to rewrite. Everything they used to insult you is now being used as evidence of your greatness. So ask yourself this, chosen one, why do they hate my clean record so much? Because your truth destroys their lies, your clarity ruins their narratives, your whole existence exposes how wrong they were. The deeper they dug, the more they realized you weren't hiding anything, you were just too real for their imagination. Number 3, when hurting you turned into their own downfall. They tried to break you and tripped straight into the hole they dug. There was one pattern the investigator couldn't escape, no matter how many times they rotated the evidence. Every person who ever tried to harm you ended up destroying themselves, and that alone shook them more than any clean record, any perfect file, any flawless history. It wasn't you hitting back. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't retaliation. It was something else. Something the universe clearly wasn't joking about. Your enemies weren't punished by you. They were punished by the consequences they created. Imagine this. Someone throws a stone at you, and the stone curves mid-air and smacks them right in the face. That's how your life looked on paper. Every betrayer stumbled. Every liar slipped. Every manipulator got exposed. Every saboteur collapsed under the weight of their own games. The investigator circled these incidents again and again, hoping there was a rational explanation. There wasn't. Another example, picture someone cutting the brake lines on your bike, expecting you to crash, but the next morning they're the ones skidding across the pavement. That's the kind of pattern the investigator kept finding. Not once, not twice, over and over. They even asked themselves, is this coincidence? Bad luck? Something they triggered? But the deeper they looked, the more undeniable it became. People didn't fall apart because of you. They fell apart because hurting you exposed who they really were. And that's when fear crept in. Not fear of you, fear for you. Because people with this kind of energy aren't supposed to exist quietly. People with this kind of karma orbit attract attention, jealousy, obsession. The investigator didn't understand it. Your enemies definitely didn't understand it. And the universe didn't care whether they understood or not. All the investigator knew was this: getting close to you protects the right people and destroys the wrong ones. Number 3, the years they couldn't trace and the reality that bent around you. They tried to track your past, and the universe erased the trail right in front of them. The investigator thought they had seen everything, but nothing prepared them for the moment the search went deeper than any normal file system. They used underground databases, deep web archives, old government servers, even systems that required clearance they technically weren't allowed to touch. And that's when the panic started, not because they found something dangerous, but because they found nothing at all. Not deletions, not edits, not corrupted files. Actual absences, like parts of your life, were never recorded in the first place. Imagine opening a book, expecting messy chapters, but instead, pages 42 to 59 are literally blank. Not torn out, just never written. That's what your timeline looked like. Whole years with no digital footprint, no logs, no trail. And the investigator wasn't stupid. They knew the difference between someone hiding their history and someone whose history bends the rules. One surveillance report said a camera shut off the moment you walked past. Another file stored your name, but had no details, like the system refused to fill in the blanks. Then came the handwritten notes, the kind professionals don't want seen. Patient senses things beyond standard perception. I'm not qualified for this case. Their presence shifts outcomes. Interview solved 5 cold cases in minutes. Nothing matched reality as they understood it. Imagine a detective running simulations expecting chaos, but each simulation points to you changing the outcome without even being present. That's the kind of glitch they were facing. And your enemies? They wanted an explanation. They wanted something human, logical, predictable. But the investigator finally realized the truth. Your life didn't have missing pieces. The universe was protecting the parts nobody had clearance to see. Number 4. The 6-month curse that made your enemies tremble. They didn't fear you. They feared what happened to everyone who touched you with bad intentions. The investigator didn't want to believe it at first. Patterns like this don't show up in normal cases. But after reviewing enough timelines, enough names, enough quiet disasters, they couldn't deny it anymore. Every single person who tried to destroy you fell apart within 6 months. Some lost their jobs, some were exposed publicly, some got caught in their own lies, some watched their relationships implode. And your hands? Clean, untouched, nowhere near the chaos. Imagine this. Someone pushes you expecting you to fall, but they slip on the floor, they polished themselves. That's how every one of your enemies looked on paper. Their downfall wasn't connected to you directly. It came from their own decisions, just magnified the second they chose you as a target. Your life wasn't a battlefield, it was a timer. The investigator wrote that down. They noticed how fast karma accelerated around you, how lies cracked open quicker, how manipulation backfired harder, how fake people exposed themselves without you doing a single thing. Another metaphor: picture a mirror that doesn't reflect your face. It reflects your intentions. Anyone who walked toward you with love grew. Anyone who walked toward you with hate rotted from the inside out. Not because you cursed them, but because your presence removed the shadows they were hiding behind. And this is the part that made the investigator freeze hardest. You weren't hurting anyone. You weren't chasing anyone. You weren't even talking to them. They weren't falling because of you. They were falling because of who they were. That's when the investigator wrote their final conclusion. You're not a threat. You're the truth. And the truth destroys liars. Number 5. Wrong place for them, perfect timing for you. You didn't cause the chaos, you just showed up, and the universe handled the rest. The investigator kept seeing something that made no sense on paper. You kept appearing in the wrong place at the right time, and every time you did, something snapped in the world around you. Power outages hitting only corrupt buildings. Computer systems collapsing minutes before dirty money moved. Surveillance footage glitching everywhere except the exact angle that exposed a criminal's face. And you, never touching anything, never interfering, never even aware you were standing in the middle of a storm the universe was quietly settling. Imagine walking into a room moments before a hidden deal goes down, and suddenly every light flickers, every device shuts down, every plan collapses. Not because you intervened, but because the universe refused to let you breathe the same air as corruption without revealing it. Another example: picture a criminal trying to sneak through a security system, only for the cameras to glitch exactly where they're standing, except one frame that shows their full identity in perfect clarity. That's the kind of coincidences the investigator kept finding. They tried to explain it with logic. Were you involved? Did you trigger something? Were you following someone? But the answer was always the same. You were just there, present, quiet, minded your business. Meanwhile, the universe flipped the entire script around you like it had been waiting for your footsteps. It wasn't you causing the collapse. It was the universe cleaning the room the moment you walked in, and the investigator's final note said it all. Wherever they stand, truth becomes impossible to hide. Number 6. The stories that shattered their last excuse. Every person they interviewed tried to explain you and ended up exposing themselves instead. The investigator thought interviews would bring clarity. Instead, they brought chaos, the kind that makes a professional sit back, drop their pen, and question everything they believed about human nature. Because the people who knew you didn't talk about normal things. They didn't talk about arguments, mistakes, or everyday interactions. They talked about moments that didn't fit within the rules of the world. One person said you showed up during the darkest night of their life, and without speaking a single word, something shifted inside them. They couldn't explain it. You didn't give advice. You didn't comfort. You just stood there. And somehow the weight they carried broke apart like thin glass. The investigator wrote, "Presence alone altered emotional state," and even they knew that line didn't belong in a standard report. Then came the confession that almost made the investigator stop the interview altogether. Someone admitted they tried to sabotage you. They lied about you, twisted your name, painted you as the villain, and every lie they spread snapped back onto them like a boomerang made of truth. They said, "I tried to ruin them, and everything I accused them of happened to me instead." Imagine hearing that from multiple people, not once, not twice, but over and over like a broken record only the universe could compose. Your ex? They dropped a truth that punched harder than anything. Every false accusation they threw at you played out in their own life like a scripted punishment. The investigator circled that sentence 3 times. And then someone whispered the line that ended the investigator's last attempt at logic. They knew things before they happened. At that moment, the case stopped being an investigation and became a revelation. Number 7. The online trail that broke their systems. They tried to track you digitally, and the internet itself refused to cooperate. The investigators' last hope for a normal explanation was your digital footprint. They thought tech would finally expose something human, something flawed, something predictable. Instead, the deeper they scanned your online presence, the more their equipment started acting like it had a mind of its own. Your digital trail didn't behave like a normal archive. Posts appeared, disappeared, then reappeared depending on who looked for them. Some people swore they saw your comments years before they actually existed. Others looked at the same page and saw nothing at all. Algorithms couldn't categorize you. Not your personality, not your interests, not your online patterns. You didn't fit their boxes because your energy kept breaking the boxes. Imagine this, a search engine trying to label you only to glitch and return blank results like you were too unpredictable for its data models. That's exactly what the investigator saw. They even found forums, hidden corners of the internet, where people wrote stories about you, not drama, not gossip, testimonies. People saying a comment you left changed their mindset, that something you said pushed them out of depression, that one conversation with you made them rethink their entire life. And these weren't coincidence posts, they were patterns. Another metaphor. Picture a fingerprint scanner trying to read your hand, but every time it scans, the pattern rearranges itself into something sharper, stronger, harder to define. That's how your digital identity behaved. Then the real fear hit. Every cyber attack against you backfired instantly. Devices crashed, accounts corrupted, hackers exposed their own secrets without meaning to. Some even locked themselves out of their systems as if the universe slammed the door in their face. The investigator's final note said it all. The system isn't protecting their data. It's protecting them. Number 8. The profile that said you should not exist. They tried to analyze your mind, and the model crashed harder than your enemies ever did. The psychological profiler walked into this case thinking it would be routine, just another subject with a pattern to decode. But the deeper they went into your life, the faster their confidence cracked. You didn't match any known category. You didn't follow any emotional blueprint. You didn't fit the patterns every human is supposed to follow. You were a paradox wrapped in clarity. Imagine a doctor checking someone for a broken bone, only to find the bone healed before they touched it. That's how your emotional history looked. You had trauma without trauma responses. You had betrayal without bitterness. You had scars without the damage that usually comes with them. You didn't suppress pain. You transformed it. You took every hit life threw at you and metabolized it like fuel. Most people drown in pain. You drink it and walk forward. The profiler circled that line 3 times. They said you didn't chase closure because you didn't need it. You lived in a state of completion, a kind of mental strength people spend decades trying to build. Every test they ran broke its own pattern. Every psychological model used to predict your behavior returned the same glitch. No match found. Another metaphor, picture running a diagnostic test and the machine returns a warning saying, "System cannot classify subject." That's exactly what happened. You weren't above normal human parameters. You were outside them completely. And the profiler's final line was the moment the entire room froze. Do not engage. This individual operates beyond predictable human psychology. Your enemies wanted proof you were weak. All they got was scientific evidence that you're nothing like them, and that's why they fear you. Number 9. The evidence that proved you weren't built like them. They looked for your origin and found a bloodline, an energy signature, and a ripple effect reality wasn't ready for. When the investigator traced your lineage, they weren't mapping a family tree. They were walking through a myth disguised as history. Your ancestors didn't age normally. Some lived decades without showing it. Some predicted disasters before they happened, saving crowds with nothing but intuition. Newspapers from old eras documented relatives surviving things no human should have survived. Medical files showed biology that didn't follow the rules. And the strangest part? Intelligence agencies tried watching your family, then backed out with the same chilling line. Beyond understanding, terminate observation. But it didn't stop there. They brought in specialists, energy experts, frequency analysts, quantum researchers, people who normally laugh at supernatural claims, but your readings wiped the smile off every face. Your photograph behaved like a signal broadcasting beyond the physical world. Your voice carried harmonics that slipped straight into people's subconscious. Equipment overloaded, images morphed based on thoughts in the room. Notes appeared saying, "Some things resist measurement." This subject rejects containment. Quantum physicists ran their tests next and froze. You created localized fields where truth surfaced, lies collapsed, and events twisted toward exposure or protection. Their conclusion was simple: reality bends around this subject. And then the scariest part wasn't the data, It was what began happening to the investigator personally. Nightmares dissolved, stress lifted, objects they needed appeared, their intuition sharpened, their emotional wounds softened. Even their dreams of you became guidance, not fear. They felt aligned, awake, lighter than they had in years. That's when the investigator finally wrote the line that sealed your file forever. This subject does not change people. They activate who people were meant to be. Number 10. The report that ended them before it ended the case. They wanted proof you were the threat, and instead got proof they were the problem. After 3 long months, the investigator finally sat down to write their final report, the one your enemies were waiting for like vultures circling a body they thought was already dead. They wanted ammunition, they wanted dirt, they wanted something sharp enough to break you, but the investigator didn't hand them a weapon, they handed them a mirror. The report didn't describe someone unstable, it described someone complete, grounded, clear, unshaken, someone whose very existence reveals the truth in others. They are not your enemy, they are your reckoning. That was the closing sentence, the line that ended the investigator's career but saved their integrity. But something inside them wouldn't settle. Curiosity, or maybe conscience, pushed them to look at the clients who hired them, and that's when the real story broke open. Every one of those victims had crossed you in the past. Emotionally, professionally, morally, they weren't wounded, they were guilty, they weren't innocent, they were architects of their own collapse. They formed little secret groups to obsess over you, stalk you, blame you, like kids terrified of the consequences of their own actions. Imagine someone touching a hot stove and then filing a complaint against the stove. That's exactly what these people were doing. They convinced themselves you were the curse, when the truth was brutal. They were destroyed by their own obsession, not by your power, not by your presence, by their refusal to evolve. The investigator realized your danger wasn't danger at all. It was exposure. You didn't hurt people. You revealed what was already inside them. And when they finally closed the file, their worldview cracked open forever. You weren't a case. You were a phenomenon, a catalyst, a spotlight that made shadows confess. In the end, the truth was simple. You were never the danger they feared. You were the truth they couldn't escape. Every lie collapsed. Every mask cracked. Every scheme fell apart the moment it touched your energy. And now you know exactly why the investigator froze. If this story hit home, press the like button if you haven't already, and if you're still not part of the family, make sure to subscribe right now. The next chapter, T.